In a forgotten corner of the countryside, where life moved slowly and silence ruled the nights, an old man waited anxiously for his son. The boy had been away for years, studying in the bustling city, chasing dreams his father could barely understand. To the father, the son was everything. The only bloodline left, the only reason he endured the loneliness of the village. When the day of his return finally came, the entire village gathered along the dusty road, curious to see the man who had left as a boy. A faint cloud of dust rose in the distance, and soon a lone figure appeared, walking toward them. The father's heart leapt with joy, but that joy soon wavered. His son's walk was heavy and deliberate, as though every step dragged an invisible weight. His face was unnaturally pale, his skin almost gray under the fading sunlight, and his eyes glimmered with a strange, reddish hue that seemed to pierce through the air. Children stopped playing and huddled behind their mothers. Elders exchanged worried glances. To them, this was not the boy they remembered. But the father, blinded by love, embraced him tightly, never realizing that his son had not returned alone. Something else had come with him. The father prepared his son's room with care, spreading fresh sheets and placing an oil lamp on the wooden table. That night, the family ate together, though the son hardly touched his food. His eyes wandered, staring at empty corners as though he saw something no one else could. When the meal was over, he quietly excused himself and retreated to his room. Midnight descended heavily on the village, the kind of silence that makes even crickets pause. The father, half asleep, was startled by the sudden slam of a window. A cold gust rushed through the corridors, though the night outside was still. He rose to check, and as he neared his son's door, he froze. A low murmur came from inside, words in no language he understood. The door creaked open slightly on its own. Through the gap, the father glimpsed his son standing rigid in the middle of the room, his back to the door, whispering to the empty air. The lamp flickered violently, shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. Summoning courage, the father pushed the door fully open, but at once the whispers ceased. His son turned slowly, his face blank, eyes hollow. "I couldn't sleep," he said flatly. In the days that followed, the son's behavior grew increasingly unsettling. At first, the father explained it away as exhaustion from his long years in the city. But soon, the changes became impossible to ignore. The boy who once laughed easily now sat in silence for hours, staring at the walls as though waiting for them to move. He abandoned the rhythm of village life. While the rooster crowed at dawn and the villagers began their day, he shut himself away in his room, curtains drawn, refusing to face the sunlight. At night, however, he wandered the house in silence. More than once, the father awoke to find his son standing at the foot of his bed, watching him with unblinking eyes, only to walk away without a word. At meals, he picked at his food absent-mindedly, chewing slowly, often pausing mid-bite as though distracted by some distant call. Sometimes, without warning, his voice would drop into a deep, guttural tone, muttering phrases that chilled the room. The family sat frozen, too afraid to question him. Whispers spread through the village. The boy has changed, he's not the same. But the father, blinded by love, clung to denial, even as fear crept steadily into his heart. One restless night, the father woke to the sound of footsteps in the courtyard. At first, he thought it was a thief, but when he peeked through the window, he saw his son standing alone beneath the pale moonlight. The boy's body was stiff, his head tilted slightly upward, his lips moving as if in quiet conversation. Yet, there was no one around him. The father's pulse quickened. He stepped outside silently, his bare feet brushing against the cool earth. As he crept closer, he heard fragments of his son's whispers, low, broken syllables that belonged to no human tongue. The air grew colder, unnaturally heavy, and a foul scent of damp earth filled his lungs. Then he saw it. Behind his son stretched a shadow, longer, darker, and far more grotesque than the boy's actual frame. It rose against the courtyard wall, its limbs unnaturally thin, its head bent at an impossible angle. For a moment, the shadow's head turned, and though it had no eyes, the father felt it staring directly at him. His breath caught in his throat. Before he could cry out, the shadow shivered violently and dissolved into the darkness. The son turned abruptly, his face blank, as if nothing had happened. The father stumbled back, heart pounding, realizing his worst fear. His son was no longer alone. Terrified and desperate, the father went to the village cleric the very next morning. The cleric, an old man with weary eyes, listened silently as the father poured out every detail. The whispers at night, the unblinking stares, and above all, the horrifying shadow he had witnessed in the courtyard. The cleric's expression darkened with each word. Without hesitation, he agreed to visit the house. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the fields, the cleric entered the boy's room. The son sat on the bed, expressionless, his gaze fixed on the wall. The cleric began to recite verses from the Quran in a low, steady tone. At once, the boy's body stiffened, and his lips twisted into a grimace. His voice, deep, alien, burst forth, mocking the recitations. The lamp in the room flickered violently, as if struggling against an unseen storm. When the recitation ended, the cleric looked at the father gravely. "Your son did not return alone," he said. "A shadow clings to him. It feeds on him. This began in the city, somewhere he should not have gone." The father's trembling hands covered his face. He recalled the rumors his son once mentioned, of a forbidden library, abandoned for decades, whispered to be a dwelling place for jinn. Now, the price of entering it had followed him home. That night, terror clawed its way into the house. It began with a scream so piercing that it shook the wooden doors from their hinges. The father rushed toward his son's room, but the moment he touched the handle, a wave of freezing air blasted through the corridor, as though the house itself had turned into a tomb. Inside, the boy writhed violently on the floor. His eyes streamed with blood, staining his face as he screamed in a voice that did not belong to him. The walls seemed alive, stretching with shadows that danced like mocking figures. Furniture rattled, the lamp burst into sparks, and an unholy laughter filled the air, echoing from every corner. The family gathered at the door, but dared not enter. They clutched each other, weeping, while the father pressed against the frame, torn between fear and desperation. Through the chaos, the boy suddenly rose, though no human strength could have lifted him that way. His body hovered inches above the ground, his head snapping back unnaturally. Words of a forgotten tongue poured from his mouth, each syllable dripping with malice. The father fell to his knees, crying out for God's mercy. He knew then that his son was not just haunted, he was possessed, and the shadow had finally revealed its full power. The cleric arrived before dawn, carrying a worn copy of the Quran and a resolve hardened by years of confronting the unseen. The father, broken and trembling, guided him into the boy's room. The air was suffocating, thick with a stench of rot and damp earth. The son lay in the corner, his body unnaturally twisted, his eyes wide open yet vacant. The cleric began to recite with a steady, commanding voice. At once, the boy convulsed violently, shrieking in a chorus of voices, some high, some deep, all inhuman. Shadows writhed along the walls, stretching grotesquely as though trying to escape the light of the verses. The family wept outside the room, unable to bear the sounds. Hours passed in a relentless struggle of scripture against darkness. Finally, with one last thunderous cry, something tore itself free from the boy's body. A towering shadow, shapeless yet menacing, thrashed against the room's corners before dissolving into the night, leaving only silence in its wake. The boy collapsed, motionless. The cleric confirmed he was alive, but when the father lifted his son, he saw only emptiness in his eyes that once held ambition and life. Now they were hollow, forever marked by what had lived within. The son had survived, but the shadow had taken something he would never regain, his soul's peace.